Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Kraft. I'm a member of Beth David Ben Israel Beth Am Synagogue, and I'm happy to share with you one of my talks on how science meets the Bible to explain some of the narratives in the Bible, specifically in the Genesis and the Exodus. And this is in context as part of a series that I gave in person. And I'm happy to have this now as a recording so that others can access it. These were the talks that I gave in a series last year, discussing some of the narratives of Genesis, including the flood of Noah and the Garden of Eden, discussion of the creation story, and a link between Purim and Passover. A talk on the patriarch-matriarch age and when it occurred. Today we're going to discuss the binding of Isaac and the lessons from this discussion. And there were talks also on where the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, and Ark lay on the Temple Mount. And a talk about Kabbalah, geometry, and modern geography. Just to whet your appetite, in the coming weeks, I have two new talks that I haven't presented before about deeper meanings of the letters and words of the Tanakh. And that'll be given in two parts, probably about a week apart, and we'll let you know when that's going to be scheduled. So when we're talking about dating the biblical narratives, these are the events that I've discussed in these talks. And it's just amazing how the science helps you to relate where and when these different events occurred. So in the talks, the first four dealt with the settings and the timing of these various narratives in the early chapters of the Bible. And among those four, we had five events that we were able to date. The creation story, the Garden of Eden, the flood epic, the patriarch-matriarch age, and today they gave the Akedah. So from these talks, we were able to date the Garden of Eden and Noah's flood to the 9th and 7th millennia, respectively. And these two talks, by the way, the talks on the universe creation story and the Garden of Eden and Noah's flood, are already up on our YouTube website at the shul, and you're welcome to access those at your leisure. So these were the dates for these two events in early Genesis. And as far as the creation of the universe, the latest scientific data from 4 years ago at the Planck spacecraft is that the universe is somewhere in the vicinity of 13.8 billion years old. And that is actually verified by the sources that we discussed in the talk on the creation story. And what about the patriarch-matriarch age? That's a separate talk, and from many different angles, we were able to date it most probably to the early 2nd millennium BCE. And that dating is going to come into play later on in this talk when we try to date the time of the Exodus. And believe it or not, from the discussion of the Akedah today, and this is just to give you a little heads up as to where we're going to be headed, we're going to be able to date pretty accurately the time of the Exodus based on evidence from the Akedah story. So today is the discussion of the Akedah, in Hebrew, the Akedat Yitzchak, from chapter 22, and it actually is very timely. I'm giving this talk around the Yamim Noraim. This was the text of the Torah that was read on the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah. The references are many, and I'm listing the 7 most relevant ones that I've used. So you can see that the discussion is going to derive from many different sources, various texts from Talmud, from some online references as well. And you're welcome to peruse these at your leisure. So I hope that you enjoy puzzles, because the Akedah has been an enigma and has challenged Jewish scholars, rabbis, sages for many, many centuries. and is actually an ancient puzzle that we're going to solve today. And it's going to go in a direction that, as far as I know, other commentators have not gone over these many, many years of biblical analysis. And through this, we're going to figure out the different pieces of the puzzle and eventually put it together to give us a final picture of what this Akedah may have been. And I'm going to just mention that this is a hypothesis that I put together over many decades of reading and lectures that I've attended. So while this may not be the only explanation, it certainly wouldn't be, but it is an explanation, as you'll see at the end, that answers almost all the questions that have been posed by scholars and by commentators over the years. I've shown this slide at each of the talks that I have given to understand the basis of science and the Bible. You have to have some familiarity with different areas of science. And we're only going to draw on a few of these in each of the talks that I've given. But you have to have some familiarity with all of these different areas of science in order to understand different aspects of the narratives that are in the Bible and to understand their context and history. So let's just summarize in chapter 22, what is the story of the binding of Isaac? Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And as we know from the reading of the first day of Rosh Hashanah, that's the chapters just before the Akedah, that Ishmael was banished from Abraham's household. And God said that that is going to be satisfactory because God specifically told him that his lineage will pass via Isaac. And in this episode, God tells Abraham to take his son, his only other son, Isaac, on a 3-day journey to Mount Moriah. And Abraham is prepared to sacrifice him on the mountain. And just as he's about to slay him, an angel comes out and tells him to stop. And God tells him he now knows he is a God-fearing and faithful person. And all of a sudden, a ram appears before him and is sacrificed in Isaac's place. And this narrative of just a few verses has challenged scholars for many, many years. And here are some of the questions that have been raised about this particular episode. Was this actually a trial of Abraham? Most scholars feel that it was, but I'm going to say and put forth a hypothesis that it was actually not a trial. At the end of the chapter is the lineage of Nahor. Nahor is Abraham's brother. And in 5 verses, his lineage is displayed. And this actually is the last aliyah on Rosh Hashanah. It's actually included in the Torah reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And the question is, why is it actually included as part of this narrative? The next is, and it's the key to this puzzle, is why the ram? In Hebrew, the word is ayil. We're going to discuss that in more detail. What did Abraham learn from the event? And just as an aside, what happened to Isaac after the episode? That's challenged people for many years as well. And also, why did God not speak to him after the event? In analyzing the biblical text from the references of a commentator of many, many years ago, de Leon, there is a way of analyzing the text which is used by scholars for many centuries. It's called Pardes. It's the acronym for Pei Resh Daled Samech. Pei being the pshat, or the straightforward meaning of the passage. Remez being the something that is hinted at by the passage but not explicitly said. Drush, which is also the root word of midrash, is a deep analysis to get a deeper meaning of the text. And finally, sod, which is only a source that is available to people who really deeply understand the text and is not easily understood, but learned through mysticism and through revelation. And there are methods that have been used by various scholars. And I'm just going to show you this text here. It's a text by a scholar by the name of Shalom Spiegel, who wrote a book called The Last Trial, on the legends and lore of the command to Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, the Akedah. This book is a compendium of lectures that Professor Spiegel wrote when he was a a lecturer in the early 20th century in Israel and then the United States, where he gave full semester courses on this one topic. And he actually compiled all of the Talmudic and other references, not just in Jewish sources, but also Christian sources, about the Akedah and the various meanings of the different passages. And he actually lists all kinds of aspects of the problems with this episode and discusses them from all of these different aspects. So from the Pshat, what is the straightforward meaning? And he lists from the sources that the Akedah is meant to condemn the act of child sacrifice to all peoples in the ancient world. This is a very common interpretation of what this narrative does in the straightforward literal meaning of the text. It's also a parallel and contrast with images of the sacrifice, which Christians have made an analogy to Jesus, that Jesus was sacrificed, whereas Isaac was only partially sacrificed. And there are didactic lectures that actually try to put these two events together. The drush, the more deep meaning of this, is that the symbolism of ashes in the context of sacrifices in the temple. And then also the fact that there's a modification of human sacrifice to extract a drop of blood instead of victim-free, that these are laws that came in later on after this episode. Also the proxy ram. Originally, the ram was used for kaparot on the high holidays, and in the rabbinic period, it was changed to a rooster and a chicken. These are common paradigms that have been used in the last few years, in the last few decades. And also the fact that Abraham withheld his impulse to harm Isaac is matched by God suppressing his impulse to hide the descendants and yet to forgive Israel. What about the remez? What about the deeper meanings that aren't explicit but are implied and that scholars have actually used? There's a connection to Mount Moriah. Moriah is the site of the Akedah, and it also, according to legend, became the site of the Temple Mount. And there is a connection between the two that we'll make very shortly. Also, it was amalgamated with the institution of substitutes for sacrifice after the temple period, and that Abraham knew his lineage would go through Isaac. And so he set an example of a proxy sacrifice to demonstrate his fear for God. However, there is the sod. This is the last ways of analyzing these passages. And is there a deeper meaning that is not completely stated here that may be behind the meaning of this episode? And I think that we might get a hint of this in this talk. So in the analysis of this puzzle, I wanted to pose 6 questions. And they are, first of all, was the episode a trial of Abraham? As I said, we're going to discuss that in a moment. Again, why was Nahor's lineage placed immediately after this episode? Why the ram? What did Abraham learn from the event? What happened to Isaac after this episode? And why did God not speak to Abraham afterwards? So in the first of the 3 questions here, was it really a trial of Abraham? The Midrash says that Abraham went through 10 trials during his lifetime. And interestingly, the actual 10 trials are not agreed to by all sages. They do agree the first one was when God told him to uproot his family and to take them to a land that he is going to show them. They almost all agree that the last trial, quote unquote, was the Akedah of Yitzchak. But what went on in the other 8 in between is actually a bit controversial. We're not going to go there today, but we're just going to talk about this 10th and last trial, which, according to most scholars, firmly cemented his reputation as a deep believer in God and confirmed his legacy of a father of a great nation. But was it really a 10th trial? Was this really a trial? And that comes to the word nes. The first sentence says, God tried Abraham. The Hebrew word is nisa. And I'll make a point here that in order to understand any of these biblical narratives, you actually have to know the biblical Hebrew really well. Biblical Hebrew is not the same as modern Hebrew. Some words are the same, but the Torah and the Tanakh use words very, very carefully. And you have to look at the shorish, at the roots of these words, and look at them from different contexts to understand what some words or phrases actually mean. The word nace can mean any of 5 different things. It could mean a trial, but it could also mean a sign. And I give a shout out here to our illustrious ritual director, Mike Rubin here at Beth David, who a number of years ago pointed this out to me when he read my hypothesis for the first time and noted that nisa, a nace, can be a sign. It can also mean a banner or flag. Aish HaTorah commentary talks about it as an uplift, so it's actually a positive influence. How can this episode be a positive influence to Abraham? Well, in fact, it may actually be, as we'll show later on. It can also mean a venture. So here's the first piece of the puzzle, that the word nace, the Hebrew word, may not mean trial, but may mean the word sign. So here's the first of our 9 clues. Next, why the ram? And this comes into a very deeper meaning, and we'll go into this in more detail later on. But Isaac asks Abraham in chapter 7 of this, verse 7 of this chapter, where is the sheep for the offering? The Hebrew word is seh, ayeh hasela olah. Where is the sheep, Father, that we're going to give as the offering? But what is actually sacrificed in the end is a ram, an ayil, the Hebrew word ayil. And so this is actually clue number 2, that we're sacrificing a ram instead of a sheep. It's very specific why this particular animal. And now in Shalom Spiegel, he actually quotes references from the Pshat that this ayil actually happened to appear just at the right time, that Abraham was ready to sacrifice and a ram appeared on the mountain and was able to sacrifice it. The drush, the deeper meanings, is that this was actually Isaac's favorite animal and was what was sacrificed in his place. Another very, very cryptic drush is that the ayil was grazing under the tree of life in the Garden of Eden and an angel fetched it for Abraham. Now, the Garden of Eden story preceded this story by many, many centuries, and according to my timelines, actually millennia. And so that's a very interesting commentary. We're going to actually touch on this in a few minutes. And that the ayil was actually consumed by fire but renewed by God so that it could carry on. In Pirkei Avot, chapter 5 in Mishnah 6, it says, Asara devarim nivru ba'erev Shabbat, that at the beginning of time, at the time of creation, that there were 10 things that God created, including Eloh. The Hebrew there, Eloh, is the ram of Avraham Avinu. It was the ram of our forefather, Abraham, was created at the beginning of time. And in Talmud Psachim, on folio 54a, Rav Yoshia stated that the ram was created on the 6th day of creation, actually before twilight. He actually gave a timing of during that 6th day when living things were created, that the ram was created at that time. Now, those are very interesting drushes, but they create a problem, as we'll see. Here is the actual reference. Even Rabbi Yoshia said in the name of his father, even the ram slaughtered by Abraham and the shamir and the worm to shape the stones for the altar were created at that time. The implication then is that if the ram was created on the 6th day, it lived for at least 2,000 years before it was sacrificed by Abraham. Now, does that actually make sense? And I put the question marks and exclamation marks. Have these commentators actually in a dream world, or are they actually thinking straight when they would imply that this ayil, this ram, could have existed for that long period of time, a living being? The Sfat Emet, who was one of the sages who lived in the 19th century, said that in Jewish law, an animal can only be sacrificed in its prime before the age of 2 years. And if Abraham was a God-fearing man, this ayil would have had to have been a younger animal. And yet the rabbis, these commentators here, say that the ram had been preserved intact and ageless for at least 2,000 years. So this is actually another clue, is that this ram was created more than 2,000 years prior to the episode. And that 2,000 is going to be explained in a little while. what about the hidden meanings? Could they be hinting at something very deeply hidden in this Torah's narrative that hasn't been revealed in any prior interpretation? Well, let's look at another Hebrew word where it says Abraham cast his eyes upward. Vayisa Abraham et einav. It did not say, and this is just before he saw the ram, it didn't say that he looked and saw the ram. It didn't say vayistakel or look or vayar, which is the word to see. It says he cast his eyes upward, and then he saw the ram caught in the thicket. However, the Torah doesn't actually say thicket. It just says it was caught in the thicket, but it didn't actually say exactly where it was in his sight line. So here is another clue that he actually looked upward. And I'm going to suggest that it wasn't just straight ahead, that he actually looked even further upward. And that's where the clues to this episode are going to lie. What happened to Isaac after the event? That's not a direct topic that I wanted to deal with, but just to mention from Spiegel that he mentioned many of the conjectures that are in the Talmud, that are in commentators that have been put forth for many years, that Abraham sent him home, that he actually sent him to the Academy of Shem. Shem was a descendant of Noah to study. That's a common interpretation. Some say he remained on Mount Moriah until he met Rivka. Some that he was actually returning with his dad, but was in shock and fatigue. He was secreted in paradise to heal. And there's actually one commentary that says he indeed was sacrificed and revived by God. Rav Tzidkiyahu HaRofei of Rome in the 13th century actually put forth this hypothesis that he was sacrificed and his dust was scattered on Mount Moriah and God brought a dew upon him and revived him. So there's quite a lot of conjectures of what actually happened to him. But in the elements in the puzzle, we're going to come back now to answer these questions that will put this puzzle together. And they are God's promises, the link of Moriah to Sinai, Nahor's lineage. Why is it there? The signs of 12, again, the ram, the lessons in the stars derived from the ram, and what did he learn from the episode? So talking about his promises, we have to realize that Isaac, again, was going to be the son through whom Abraham's generations would proceed. It's stated by God in the previous chapter, and also that his descendants, he said twice, would be as numerous as the stars above and the sand on the seashore. So stopping right here, you could actually make an argument that we have an answer, that this could not have been a trial because God told him that the lineage would go through Isaac, and there was no way he could have sacrificed this quote-unquote chosen son if God was promising him a lineage for the generations to come, and a lineage that was going to be plentiful and be as numerous as God told him. So this could not have occurred if his only chosen son was going to be sacrificed. God went further and said that his descendants would be enslaved for 400 years and then freed to be led to the promised land. And also very telling is God said that you will be a contented man at the time that you die. Tikaber, you will be buried, and b'seiva tova, in contentment. There's no way that this would have been possible if he had sacrificed this only chosen son. So Abraham would have had to know beforehand that his son would not be sacrificed. So we could call it a spiritual trial, a philosophical trial, but it would not have been a physical trial of a sacrifice of his son, because he told him that his lineage would proceed through Isaac, not Ishmael. He would be the father of a large nation and die a contented man. That right away puts forth the idea that this episode had a different meaning and was not going to be a trial. There was also two other very telling passages here that Rashi, the great commentator, commented on two verses. It says, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. When Abraham and Isaac approached Mount Moriah, they were walking together. And it said twice in verses 6 and 8, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. And Rashi makes the point that they went with a common purpose, that they both knew that there was something about this event that was going to be a learning process for both of them. this is something that, again, tells you that there was something that they knew that would make this a learning experience, a sign, not a trial. So he said they walked with a common purpose, and the Midrash Rabbah, one of the great commentaries on the Bible, said that Isaac participated of his own free will, and of course the commentators actually say that he was a mature adult, 37 years old, according to some commentators, so he wouldn't have been naive about this event and the fact that it was going to have some meaning. So here's another piece of the puzzle, that Isaac couldn't be sacrificed, plain and simple. God also promised that his descendants, we said, would be enslaved for 400 years. Some commentators say it was 210 years, but the entire enslavement paradigm, that whole part of the history, encompassed 400 years, and then they would be freed and led to the promised land in Canaan. The question is, what vital piece of information did God not tell Abraham? And let me give you an analogy. Suppose you got a bar mitzvah invitation that gives you the name of the bar mitzvah boy. It's going to be at Beth David Synagogue, and let's hope, we're talking now in the time of COVID, let's hope that it won't be too long before we'll be able to have full, enriched, in-person celebrations and not just limited numbers. But suppose you're going to get an invitation to Beth David, and the dress will be semi-formal, and the people invited are family and friends. So you've got the person, you've got the location, who's going to be invited, but what piece of information is not in the invitation? Let's do the analogy here. God said your descendants would be enslaved in a foreign land, then freed and led to the promised land in Canaan. Here's God's invitation. The Israelites are the invitees. Their location eventually will be Egypt, and the event will be the Exodus after 400 years of enslavement. What did he not tell them? The vital piece of information, just like the bar mitzvah invitation, is the timing. Just like I didn't give you the timing of the bar mitzvah that you're supposed to be invited to, Abraham did not get the information from God about the timing of the freeing of his people. He knows it would be enslavement for 400 years. They would be led out to the land that God promised, but God never told him explicitly the timing of the freeing from Egypt. That is going to be one of the main clues of this puzzle, and what the puzzle is going to lead us to at the very end. Another element is the links of Moriah to Sinai, and it comes also, again, from understanding the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word Moriah, the name of the mountain, and the word Torah both come from the shoresh, from the three-letter Hebrew root, Yud Resh He, which means to guide. So Mount Moriah, the name itself, is the mountain of guidance. Moriah, I am showing you something. It's something that's being shown to Abraham in some way, a lesson for him, just as the Torah is a guide for us in our Jewish practice. So this is more than just a trial. This is not a trial. This is actually a learning process, just as the Torah was given. Both of these events took 3 days of preparation. The ram's horn, which sounded, the kol shofar that we read on Rosh Hashanah, the kol shofar from Shofarot, is also what was sacrificed in the place of Isaac. And Onkelos, the commentator who lived in the 2nd century and did a translation into Aramaic of the Bible, actually didn't translate the Bible or the Torah exactly, word for word. He actually put in phrases that had deeper implications, one of it being that when he translated the name Moriah, it was called Ara Pulchana, the land of temple service. So Onkelos actually linked in his commentary the word Moriah with the temple service. And so there's a connection between the temple service, Canaan becoming Israel, and this learning process of the Akedah are linked. And actually in the verse, when Abraham names that place, he gives it a name, not Moriah, but Hashem Yireh. God will observe. So Abraham, in that event, links this special place, Moriah, with a sacred space that God will see and will be the site of God's temple. So another piece of the puzzle of the links of this event on Mount Moriah with the giving of Torah. Why is Nahor's lineage put there? Well, the Pshat, and I have to give some credit here to Rabbi Harvey Meyerowitz, who was the leader of the Chavruah service. So before Michael Rubin was our Shamash, we had different leaders of this Chavruah service, and Rabbi Meyerowitz led it for at least 2 or 3 years and gave a drush on Yom Kippur about Nahor's lineage in this chapter. And the Pshat is that Rivka is included in that lineage. And that links the stories following that of Yitzchak surviving this episode and eventually getting a wife who was Rivka. But are there some deeper meanings? And the answer is yes. And Rabbi Meyerowitz pointed this out, and this was one of the clues that helped me to put this hypothesis together. There are 12 children listed under Nahor. Now, if you look at the signs of 12, 12 is featured as a meaning of a society or nation in biblical times. And it's featured several times in Bereshit, in Genesis. This lineage of Nahor is the first generation after Abraham and his brother Nahor. There's another sign of 12. There's a sign of 12 people in the generation after that. So the following generation is actually the children of Ishmael. So that's God's grandchildren, Abraham's grandchildren. So the children of Ishmael in chapter 25 are listed, and there's also 12 of them. That is the next generation. So when Abraham is told that he's going to be the father of a great nation, he had to now think, I've seen my brother having 12 children. The next generation has 12 children. Then he must have reasoned that his lineage through Isaac would have to be the generation after Jacob. That would be 12 as his nation. And Abraham did live, according to the Midrash, to at least 15 years during the lives of Jacob and Esau. He would have seen these grandchildren. And if he lived for at least 15 years, then he would realize that since Isaac only had these 2 children, that his lineage of 12 must be following that. So the generation of after Nahor and Abraham had 12 in Nahor's family. The children of Ishmael, the son that wasn't chosen, had 12. Abraham would have realized that the next generation had to have the lineage of 12 for him, and that would be the sons of Jacob, in order for that lineage to be propagated to the numbers that God is predicting. So we're talking about 12s in the next generations. But now this talk is going to take a bit of a turn, because 12 in these is not the only sign of 12 that Abraham would have been familiar with or that existed at that time. And now we come to some of the crux of the matter in terms of the Akedah code, because there is, in the hidden meaning of this passage, is the 4th sign of 12. Our forefathers were worshippers of stars. It's said in the Goldberg Haggadah. It's actually, the wording has been changed to Avodah Zarah, but some of the original text of the Haggadah said that Avdei Kochavim Hayu Avoteinu, that our worshippers knew the passage and the meaning of the stars. And they actually worshipped idols at that time. And Abraham was immersed in that growing up and would have been well aware of the signs within the stars and the constellations. So where is there a 4th sign of 12 that would have had some meaning for Abraham and would have derived from this episode? Because remember, we said he didn't just look to see the ram. Vayisad einav, he actually cast his eyes upward. Where upward is the 4th sign of 12, and that is the zodiac. The 12 signs that we see revolving around us throughout the year, which is the zodiac. And there are 12 houses, quote unquote, in the zodiac that I'm going to sing for you. There's actually a song from Hair, if you know the musical from, I won't say how many years ago, from the 1960s. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. If you remember the song, and beautifully sung by the Fifth Dimension, it says that it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius, which is our era right now. the generations that are alive now are in the dawning of this age, of this house, this age of Aquarius. What does that actually mean? And it's actually part of the understanding of how the zodiac reflects and is reflected in this episode. Now, there is this belief that Jews should not be believing in or studying the zodiac and the astrology, but the zodiac itself, it actually manifests in many Jewish contexts, even in the Talmud, and also in various archaeological sites. There's the ancient synagogue at Na'ara, which has a beautifully preserved mosaic zodiac, and the famous Beit Alpha synagogue, which many people have visited. Many of us visiting Israel would have visited it. A beautifully preserved, again, zodiac, and it's in many places throughout the land of Israel. So the 12 of the zodiac is the next to last clue. So let me just give you a little bit of background about how this relates to this episode. Well, we know that there's various cycles, and you learn this in school, that the Earth rotates. If this is the Earth, it rotates around its axis every day. And what are the other cycles? So here's one day, the Earth rotates, go through day and night, almost 24 hours. Another cycle is that the moon revolves around the Earth, and it takes 30 days for us to go through 1 month. And so that's another cycle, is the monthly cycle. And then there's the cycle where the Earth and the moon are now going around the sun, and that takes 1 year to make this revolution all the way around through the seasons to come back to the original position. So 24 hours to rotate on its axis, 30 days for the moon to revolve around the Earth, a little over 365 days to orbit the sun. And the question is there another cycle? And the answer is yes, there is. There is one more cycle, and it's not one that I learned in school. It's one that I learned about 30 years ago, and one that since that time has been written about in many different sources. And the cycle is that the Earth wobbles around its axis. What does that mean? It's not just spinning. It's actually spinning and wobbling like this. I'm exaggerating the movement because you'll see it's not a very large movement, but it is wobbling as it's going around, but very, very slowly. So then it brings me to the point, you learn in school that the Earth has a certain tilt, okay? It's tilted about its axis. And we've learned that right now it's at 23 degrees off the vertical. That's the Earth is spinning at this angle. It turns out that because of this wobble, the angle that it rotates or wobbles at changes by several degrees over the centuries, from 22 degrees wobbling to 25, back to 22 in a cycle. And this wobble takes a very long time to occur. It takes almost 26,000 years to make a full revolution of this wobble. So we're doing the yearly thing, the monthly thing, but there's a 26,000 year wobble of the Earth. And one of my colleagues at Toronto Western loves the word. He sees me and says, "Steve, how's the wobble?" Because you heard this talk. So anyhow, there's a wobble that we go through 26,000 years, and that has implications for the zodiac. So if I just give you 6 of the 12 signs, what this wobble does is some very interesting phenomena. Let's go back one step. We said that the Earth is going around the sun. It takes a year. The zodiac also has a yearly cycle. So because of the movement of the Earth, the stars that we see throughout the year change. The star clusters we see in the sky change, and they are changing, and among those star clusters are the constellations that make up the zodiac. And just for your own information, if you wonder what the designation is of the zodiac sign anytime during the year, it's the sign that is in the eastern sky at that month. So if we are in, let's say, if you are a Leo, which my wife is, if you're in August, the August Leo sign, the sign of Leo, which is there through most of August, is in the eastern sky during the month of August. If you are under a different sign, I believe Capricorn around the New Year's, if you were born around New Year's, Capricorn is in the eastern sky, and that's what designates the zodiac sign that is your horoscope sign. So we designate it by what's in the eastern sky, and what is in the eastern sky at that time is the zodiac sign for that month. And it changes throughout the year so that a different zodiac sign appears in the eastern sky throughout the year. Here are the signs, these 6 signs that I'm using here. And if we give them their labels, each month a different sign moves, and here are the dates assigned to it. And that's when the sign is in the eastern sky for that month-long period. And so over New Year's, as I mentioned, Capricorn is in the eastern sky. And then a month later, Aquarius is in the eastern sky. So if you're born in late January or into February, you would be under Aquarius. And then a month later, Pisces, and so on. So they move, and there is what looks like a movement of shifting to the right throughout this year. So the zodiac signs seem to move to the right as the year progresses. Now, this is where something very interesting comes, and that is, how do we designate the marker one? So here are the zodiac signs moving along through the year. And in the eastern sky, what you'll see is that these signs rotate every month. So Capricorn moves off, Aquarius moves over, now it's Pisces, and for a month it will move over, then Aries comes into the eastern sky. So this is what you see each month throughout the year, that these signs are moving along. But then the question is, you've got all these 12 signs moving around. What is the zero reference point? And this goes back to ancient times, back before the Common Era, that people in the ancient world actually knew about the zodiac, and they had a reference point. What was the 0 point of this wheel, this zodiac wheel that's going around each year? What is the designated 0 point? What is the starting point that is designated? And it turns out that the 0 reference point, which of these is the 0 reference point, is actually what designates the age in which we live. So the song, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's an age. We live under a certain age designated by the reference sign of that age. And it actually was set in the ancient world at the time of the spring equinox, because the spring equinox was a time that was a positive and sort of enjoyable time, because it was the beginning of spring, the beginning of fruitfulness, the beginning of crops, the beginning of many things, and the weather was getting better. And so the spring equinox was of great significance for people in the ancient world. And it's the sign that is in the east on March 20th to 21st that designates the age. And at present, do you know what the sign is coming up in the eastern sky now? On the morning of March 21st, it is Pisces. So we are in the era of Pisces. And it's the sign that rises in the east on March 21st, and it is the current reference point. So the song many years ago would have been, we are dawning of the age of Pisces at some point. Now there's going to be a change. There's going to be a change that the reference point is going to change from Pisces to Aquarius. So we're in the age of Pisces now, and it turns out that the same sign, this reference sign, is going to be the eastern sky on the spring equinox for 2,200 years. And that's because of the cycle. I said the cycle is almost 26,000 years of this wobble. And what it means is that the Earth is going to point in a certain direction, and only one sign will be there in the eastern sky on March 21st, but it will be there for all of 2,200 years. So during this wobble, each sign, each age lasts 2,200 years. And here's, I'm just showing it pictorially. Right now in the eastern sky is Pisces. But because of the wobble, very soon the direction is going to change. The perspective from the eastern sky, from the Middle East, looking eastward, is going to change because of the wobble. So when the Earth's wobble slowly is changing, right? It's changing by a little bit every century, and it will actually reach the point, the wobble will reach the point where in the eastern sky, Pisces will no longer rise on March 21st, but Aquarius will. And this will occur at the end of this century. So the song Hair is actually right. We're actually going into the age of Aquarius. And it will be the sign in the eastern sky on March 21st, starting at the end of this century. So the zero reference point will change from Pisces as it is now. Within the century, it's going to change to Aquarius. So Pisces has risen in the east for 2,200 years as a zero reference point, but it's going to change. This marker sign designating the age will change to Aquarius, and it will be the sign that our descendants, okay, are going to be seeing in the eastern sky on March 21st for all of 2,200 years. And that will be the sign rising there. And the age of Aquarius will last from 2100 to 4300 of the Common Era. After that, a different sign will become the age, because the wobble will bring a different sign into perspective. This means that Pisces will not be the reference sign or our age for another 26,000 years. So the reference point will switch to Aquarius. That will become the zero reference point. And now I want you to see the implication of that. And this is profound, because if you look at the dates that are assigned to these different zodiac signs, watch what happens when Aquarius becomes the reference sign. I'm going to do that again. As we go, look at the dates. They have shifted by a month. What does that mean? It means that somebody born on your birthday in another 100 years will have a different horoscope sign from the one that you have. And in another 2,200 years, somebody born on that date will have yet a different zodiac sign. So I'm not sure how the horoscope experts are going to deal with this. I understand there's different contingencies being done, but all of the attributes assigned to these different signs are going to be different for different months. So the zodiac signs are going to change for the given months, and so people are going to have different horoscope signs born on the same birthday as they are now. So this is just one of the implications of this change. So all of the horoscope signs will be shifted by a month in the year, starting in the next century. So as again, Pisces has been the age from just prior to the Common Era up through what will be the end of this century. Now that actually brings up an interesting point. If you look at Pisces being the age for this time, it actually brings up another very interesting religious fact, is that what religion has been the dominant religion, or one of the dominant religions, during this particular era, during this age of Pisces? Well, it's been Christianity. From the early parts of this age through these 2,000 years. And what is one of the symbols of Christianity? Well, it's the fish. And in the Catholic religion, they actually avoid meat on Fridays, and most people will eat fish instead. And we also have the parables of Jesus about the fish and so on. And we talk about St. Peter's fish and so on. There's all these analogies to fish in Christian beliefs and practices. And so it actually makes sense that we're in the age of Pisces, and a religion that has been dominant throughout this would have this as its symbol. But it brings us now to one of the solutions of the Akedah code, and that is, if Pisces was the era, the age from 100 BCE to the end of this century, what was the age prior to that? Because the age prior to that is encompassing the patriarch-matriarch age during which Abraham would have lived. And if we now look at the various timelines, the actual timelines of when that era was is going to help us solve the question of when was the Exodus from Egypt. But the matriarch-matriarch age from the previous other talk that I've given actually is localized, as I mentioned, into the second millennium, the early second millennium BCE. And that would have been the age during which Abraham would have lived. So here we are on this March the 21st. Right now we're at Pisces, but the prior one, because of the wobble, was Aries. So let me just sit for 1 second here and just let you digest that. During the patriarch-matriarch age, the sign that was the marker sign was Aries, the ram. So here we have a situation where for 2,200 years, Aries was the sign, the marker sign. We're now in Pisces. We're going to move by the wobble, here's the wobble again, to Aquarius very soon. There is what's called a precession, an actual movement of this marker sign through the ages. And this movement is called the precession of the equinoxes. And you can read this in on Wikipedia or various sources. It describes this phenomenon, how the signs actually move every 2,200 years, very slowly, a fraction of a degree every year, until it passes into the new segment or the new sector. And Hipparchus of Greece was the first to actually describe it in detail, but it actually was known in the Talmud. So here's a passage from Brachot, folio 59b. They actually talk about the zodiac in their orderly progress. So that could mean the monthly progress, they knew that very well, or it could actually be talking about something much grander, which we're talking about here. In the commentary to Brachot, the commentators mention that the movement, that the changing of the position of the zodiac signs is called precession of the equinoxes. It's actually in these commentaries because of the shifting of the point of intersection of the ecliptic. This is the physical, the geophysical, astrophysical nuances and nitty-gritty of it, of how it occurs, but it's due to this wobble of the earth and how this signs of the zodiac change their reference point over time, well known in the time of the Talmud. So during that period from 2300 to 100 BCE, Aries was the sign in the eastern sky on the vernal equinox. So here are the four sort of contemporaneous zodiac signs and their eras. So Aries is in the midst of this series during the second millennium BCE, during the time of the patriarchs, 2300 to 100 BCE in the early second millennium. So let me go back to what I proposed very early in this talk, that in Talmud Psachim, Rabbi Yoshia mentioned that the ram was created on the 6th day before twilight, and from the Sfat Emet, the implication is, from these sages, that the ram lived, quote unquote, for 2,000 years. Now, that isn't so unusual, because the era of the ram is almost exactly that, 2,200 years, 2,160 years to be exact. So this, I think, is part of the sod, some of the deep meaning that is in the passage if you read it and analyze it very carefully. And here is now the final piece of the puzzle. In a 2,200-year period, the ancients believed that within that period, when these signs changed over, it was a sign of bad omens. So for whatever reason, they had in their minds that when there was a shift, I guess it was a time of discomfort or change, things changed, the star systems changed, the era changed, the age changed. They were bad omens at the beginning and end. But the best optimistic and positive vibes came in the middle. There was something special about the middle of an age. And now we can put this puzzle together here by looking at the age of Aries from this perspective, between 100 BCE back to 2300 BCE. When is the good omen? The best and most positive time in this era was the 13th century BCE. What happened in the 13th century BCE, according to most biblical scholars, was the period of the Exodus and the giving of the Torah. And is there archaeologic evidence that this actually occurred? Could this Akedah code be a prophecy for Abraham of the timing of the Exodus? Is there evidence that this could be the timing that God was giving him in this episode? There's actually a stele from a very short-lived pharaoh. He only reigned for 3 years, but it's the stele of Merneptah. And his stele is in the Berlin Museum and is the first hard evidence we have archaeologically of a nation called Israel. This is what it looks like in the Berlin Museum. And in these hieroglyphics at the bottom is this phrase, Israel is wasted, its seed is not. The first time that the nation of Israel is listed by another civilization. And believe it or not, there's a reciprocal acknowledgement of the presence of this Pharaoh in the Bible. In the book of Joshua, in Yehoshua chapter 15, verse 9, it says, from the top of the mountain, he's describing a location here. From the top of the mountain, may Rosh Hahar el Ma'ayan may Neftoach. This brings me again to emphasize that you have to know the language of the Bible very accurately to know how to interpret some enigmas. There is a problem with this passage, and it goes back to the ancient manuscripts from which this was taken, because the ancient manuscripts didn't necessarily put the spacing of the words very accurately. They were actually runs of letters. And the sages, in their best knowledge, tried to divide the words as they thought were best fit. But if you look at the words Ma'ayan me Neftoach, it's a repetition. It's the waters of the spring of Neftoach, or the spring of the waters of Neftoach, which is really redundant. But if you look at the word me Neftoach and realize that that is actually could be a single word, it actually is the Hebrew biblical name of this pharaoh. This is not Ma'ayan of the waters of Neftoach, it's the Ma'ayan of Meneftoach, of this pharaoh who encounters the Israelites in the late 13th millennium BCE. And so we talk about the connection of the two, that Aries, again, the connection of Moriah to Sinai, that we actually have a corroboration from the Bible of this pharaoh and locating it to the 13th century BCE. So again, here are the last pieces of the puzzle. We said that Abraham cast his eyes upward to see the ram in verse 13. Vayisa Avraham et Einav. My conjecture is that he was looking up not directly at a ram, but a symbolic ram that gave him the clue to the solution of this puzzle, that it was the age of Aries. Now, there may have been a sacrifice of a ram at that time, but the cosmic ram, it's the ram that existed during the time of the patriarchs, the age of Aries, that gave Abraham this clue. So it was not a sign, not a trial, it wasn't a trial, this was a sign to Abraham. It was a code or sign from the timing of when his descendants would be freed of bondage, and the connection of Moriah to Torah when they'd be given the Torah in the middle of the age of Aries in the 13th century BCE. And therefore, he knew the destiny of his people. He would indeed die as a contented and happy man. And there was nothing more God had to tell him after this episode. And here again, I put it in a different perspective. What piece of information did he not give him? Here's the invitation. Israelites are the name of the invitees. They're located in Egypt. There will be an exodus after 400 years. And I said, what piece of information is missing? Is the timing of that exodus. When will God deliver his people? That was what God gave him, that final fact in this episode we call the Akedah Yitzchak. And if you look at the dates that I've put forward here, the archaeologic and other societal evidence of the patriarch and matriarch age, and this hypothesis that this is actually linking it to the date of the Exodus, there's actually exactly 400 years accounted for in the years of slavery. Now, it's not exactly 400 because don't forget, it occurred after the time of Joseph. So in the patriarch-matriarch age discussion, I do include some words about Joseph, but if Joseph existed at the end of this time, we have to allow about 125 years for the life of Joseph, or 110 years. That would give you a perfect timeline for the 400 years of slavery, and again, date the Exodus exactly then. Just as a final little addition, when you talk about the precession of the equinoxes and the implications, there is a very interesting archaeological implication of this knowledge of the precession and some of the landmarks that many of us know about and have learned about, and that archaeologists have investigated and conjectured over for many, many centuries. And that is the design of the Giza Plateau. These are the pyramids, the main three pyramids that date back to about 2500 BCE to the early kingdom. These are the three pharaohs who built these three pyramids, and they were built around the 26th centuries BCE. This is what they look like from an aerial view. And the way these pyramids were designed, a pyramid was meant to be a house for the pharaoh who had died. But more than that, it was meant to actually help them to go to their spirit to reach the constellation called Orion. You may have heard of Orion's belt. It's a series of stars. It's thought that the spirit of the pharaoh would migrate up to this constellation called Orion. Orion is not a member of the zodiac because it's not in the right latitude, so to speak, but it is one that was worshipped at the time of the Egyptians, and they felt that the pharaoh's spirit went up to this constellation of Orion. And the souls were transported there, and this is the a telescope view of the constellation of Orion. And you'll see that the three brightest stars that are named here are in this array. And if you look at the array a little more closely, does it match something you just saw? And that is the array of the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. There's a blueprint for these three pyramids. You've probably read about many conjectures of how they were built, how did they get those big stones up to the top, the geometric perfection that all of these pyramids have that are very enigmatic and have troubled people for many, many years. But one thing that isn't well known is that these three are actually not only each have its own enigma, but the way that they are arrayed is very, very interesting because they are arrayed according to the blueprint of the constellation of Orion, but not exactly. There's not an exact match. Astronomers now have programs that can trace the path of the stars over many millennia. You can ask them to show you how this star cluster looked 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, forward 10,000, 20,000 years. It turns out that when you actually trace these three stars, there is an exact match to what's on the Giza Plateau in the 11th millennium BCE, 10,250 years BCE. Now, why is that interesting? Well, there's another structure on the Giza Plateau called the Sphinx. And this is what it looks like. It has the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh. And there's been a lot of archaeological discussion about when this was actually carved. It's actually thought to have been carved around the time of the pyramids, but there's another theory that actually it was not. It's got the body of a lion. And if I just did a stylized diagram, it actually is facing directly east. Just like a lot of the references we talked about earlier with the zodiac. So when was it carved and what was its meaning? Well, if you look at the body of the Sphinx, it's been weathered with layers. And there is a hypothesis, it's not agreed to by everyone, that it could only have had this weathering by water. And the last time that this plateau was underwater was in the 9th millennium BCE. So it's thought that it may have been carved before that time. And what was its meaning? Why is it the body of a lion, of all the different animals or designs that it could have been, that it's thought that it may be marking the age of its sign, the sign of Leo? And does that make sense? Well, if we go back to the wall and talk about the ages going back,
when was Leo the sign and the age that we were talking about?
It was actually between 11,000 BCE and 8800 BCE, exactly when the conjecture of when it was supposed to have been built. So if the Sphinx has the design of a lion facing east, could it have been a marker for when that civilization designed the Giza Plateau? And then the pharaohs in the 26th century BCE designed their pyramids on this template, on the template of Orion in that sign, not necessarily on the sign at the time, 3000 BCE. So the Sphinx may have been designed to gate at its sign to mark the 11th century BCE, or sorry, the 11th millennium BCE, looking at its sign. And then exactly at that time, these would have been exactly coincidental. And so
The map of the pyramids may have been set at the same time as the message
of the Sphinx. And that's a conjecture that is in one of the sources that I quoted for you earlier on, and you can read about it in more detail, all due to this phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes. So I'm just going to finish by showing you these are the different sciences that we utilize in the analysis of the books that and narratives that I've talked about in the Bible. Today, we've used these various sciences, and we will delve into other ones when you read about and when you have a chance to see some of the other presentations that I've done that are online, and they delve into other areas of science that I've listed here. So let's put this code together. Here are all of the clues that we put together, and they all point to a sign to Abraham. That sign is the ram, the cosmic ram, the one that is the age during which he lived and which God gave him as a clue as to when his people would be freed and be given the Torah. And now we can firmly date the Exodus based on the Akedah, but also, as I mentioned, from the Bible itself and from archaeology. And since I'm doing this at the beginning of the year 5781, I want to wish everybody a Shana Tova. And if you're seeing it at any other time during the year, keep well, and let's hope we're over this COVID business very soon. Thanks very much.